So we're in a series, The Lamb of God, and last week we talked about the promised Lamb of God, and we looked at a story in the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 3, and as we talked about that, and we looked at kind of the mess that we've gotten into a little bit, we saw the beginnings of the promise of God, of a Messiah, of a Savior. We had messed up. Adam and Eve sinned, and sin entered the world, but God promised them that he was going to send somebody to crush Satan. And so as we looked at that, we talked about tests and temptations. And sometimes it's hard to decipher between the two. Is this a test from God? Is this a temptation from Satan, the world, or my selfish self? Today, as we get into our text, it's pretty clear. The Bible tells us right away, this is a test from God. But as we read this is a story, I don't know, maybe many of us have read or heard or thought about, and it's a challenging story for me anyway. I think there's a lot of things as we get into the Bible and we read, it's kind of messy at times, and I'm like, I don't know if I like it all the time, but the reality is the Bible is real life. This is real history. This is real people living in a real sinful and broken world that God wants to reclaim. And so as we look at our story today, and we're gonna see that this is kind of messy. There's a struggle here. As I think about Adam and Eve, shortly after what we read last week, God banished them from the garden. He sent them away. And then he guarded the garden so that they could not come back because he didn't want them to eat from the tree of life. And as I read that at first, I'm like, gosh, come on. That sounds kind of harsh, God. What's going on? But the truth is, God was actually protecting them. He did not want them to live forever in the state of sinfulness and brokenness that they were in. And so he started a plan that he promised in the garden then, and we're going to see it again today. We're still in the book of Genesis. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 22. We're going to read verses 1 through 18 this morning. And we're looking at a man named Abraham and his son Isaac this morning as we get into this. And Abraham is a man, it's interesting as the worship songs that we were singing, he's a man whom God changed his name from Abram to Abraham. He is a man whom God called by name, and we don't really know why, but God specifically called Abraham. And God gave him a promise that through him, that through his offspring, he would be the father of a great nation. And he promised him that through his offspring, that the whole world would be blessed. And these were promises that Abraham got when he was in his 70s. Just saying, wait a second. Do you know how this works, God? I'm kind of old. He was old. Yet Abraham followed and trusted God, but he didn't always do it perfectly. There were times when he messed that up. And it's the same is true of us. But the key is that he was persistently pursuing God. He didn't stop. He didn't do it perfectly, but he did it persistently. And so this morning, as we get into Genesis chapter 22, we look at this. At this point, Abraham and his wife are pretty old. They're older than me. That's pretty old. But God is going to keep his promise. And so we'll see as God provides here. Genesis 22 verse 1 says, sometime later, God tested Abraham. So we know right away, this is a test. God is testing Abraham. And we talked about tests last week. We go through a test. I talked about Mr. Dolph and his math. It was to make me better, to improve me. Tests either reveal where we are strong or inadequate, Like, I fail a math test, it's because I'm inadequate, or if I do well, it's because I'm strong in that area. And so they reveal where we are, but they also help grow where we are. And so this test is a test from God to reveal Abraham's faith. Abraham has been walking in faith, but hasn't always done it well. He's made his wife tell people that she was his sister, not his wife, because he wasn't sure that God would protect him, right? He didn't fully trust that promise. And so, go on. It's sometime later, 22:1, sometime later God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah." So if we're familiar with Abraham and this story, right away that first part kind of jumps out at us because Abraham had more than one son. And so there was a point, so at 75, Abraham begins following God's calling. At 86, Abraham and Sarah, his wife, decides that, this promise of God for these offspring it's not moving along. It's been 11 years, and this is not happening like we expect. Let's help God. And so Sarah convinces Abraham, and he agrees to have a child with his servant Hagar. And they have a son, Ishmael. But that wasn't the son that God had promised him. That was the point where Abraham took matters into his own hands and tried to help God. But if you know the story, it didn't really help. And so God is pointing to, I made a promise to you, Abraham, of a son who would live this out. And God even tells him earlier that promise is through Isaac. That's who this is coming through that promise. And so when God points to take your son, your only son, whom you love, he's pointing back and reminding Abraham of that promise, but he's also pointing forward to the cross, when God would send his only son, whom he loves, as a sacrifice for us. He says, go to the region of Moriah. It's really interesting, and this will be even more interesting, I think, as we get later in this text. Moriah is where Mount Moriah was, the region of Moriah. It is where Jerusalem is today. And so that is the area that God is sending Abraham, and he's pointing him to that area. Verse 2 goes on, "Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." That sounds hard. That sounds challenging. That sounds like something I don't ever want to hear from God. As I look at that and think about that, I'm like, what is he doing? And I wonder, did Abraham think the same thing as he heard this? A burnt offering literally means to go up into smoke, to ascend. A burnt offering was not burnt alive. The offering was sacrificed. It was killed first, and then it was placed on the fire, and it was completely burnt up, completely consumed. It was an offering that symbolizes giving everything to God, not just part of it, but all of it. And God is pointing Abraham to, you're still not giving everything to me. There's still some things that you're holding back. And I desire everything. I want all of you. And so as Abraham is learning, and I think he's growing through these things, but God is still teaching him through tests. Verse 3, "Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took him with two of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about." So Abraham has this calling. It says he got up early the next morning. I wonder how much Abraham slept that night. Early the next morning might have been like, I laid down for about 2 seconds. I'm not sleeping. I'm getting up early. Abraham is, honestly, he's probably in his 120s. He's old. He's well over 100 years old. He gets up early the next morning, loads up the donkey, and then cuts enough wood for the burnt offering, and then set out for the place with two servants and his son Isaac. And so there's some work involved. Abraham is doing preparation. He gets up early and he begins to prepare for this. And I imagine he didn't sleep much that night before. And I imagine that he did a whole lot of talking with God in this process. But he's being obedient. He's being obedient to what God had called him. Sometimes I think we get called to things, and I feel like maybe sometimes I have a tendency to do this. Like God is calling me to do something, and then I'm like, okay, and then I wait, and I don't do anything. And I think even in the waiting, there's preparation that needs to be done. Abraham was preparing for this. I don't know how much wood would have been needed that he had to cut, but this wasn't like the wood of, we're roasting a marshmallow over. Like this is going to take a bit of wood to burn an entire sacrifice. And so there was work that had to be done even before. And so Abraham was preparing for that. Verse 4, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. So for 3 days, Abraham got this calling from God. And for 3 days, he's been thinking about this. He's been contemplating the death of his son, Isaac. How's this going to work? What is God going to do? This is a contradiction here in a sense that Abraham is facing. Like, but God promised me that through Isaac, I would become the father of a great nation. God promised that through him, the entire world would be blessed. And so Abraham had to believe, he had to trust. I don't know how this is going to work out, but God is going to do something that it will. That's what he had to trust. And for 3 days, he had time to think about that trust as he walked. I don't think it's a coincidence that for 3 days, Jesus' disciples had time to contemplate the death of Jesus. They had time to contemplate, wow, is this the end? Is this over? Like, I thought he was the one. Is it really the Messiah? That opportunity. And God is doing this. God is pointing, even at this time, ahead to the cross and to the ultimate sacrifice. And I think, going on, verse 5, he said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. So he has his servants stay. I think it's interesting. Isaac was accompanied by 2 men and his father. I think Jesus was accompanied by 2 men and his father as he went to the cross, a criminal on each side. Again, I don't think these are coincidences. This is God pointing forward to the cross. But look at Abraham's faith in verse 5. Stay here while I and the boy go there. We will worship. What Abraham's saying is worship, and that we're going to go to the top of this mountain, and we are going to bow down and surrender to God, totally trusting him, because he is God. That's our worship. That's what we're going to do. And so my son and I are going to go worship together, and then he says, we will come back to you. It's faith. It's trusting God. I don't know how this is going to work out, but we will come back to you. I believe that. I trust that. That's what he's telling his servants. I think we can read later in Hebrews chapter 11, we get this sense, like Abraham was convinced that even if he had to sacrifice his son, God could have brought him back to life. He could have raised him from the dead. And so he's trusting. He doesn't know how this is going to work, but he is completely trusting that God is going to provide on his promises. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife as the 2 of them went on together. Again, this amount of wood, this is not some kindling in a backpack, right? This is some serious amount of wood to be able to burn this sacrifice. This is an incredible picture of Jesus carrying his cross to Golgotha. He walked up the mountain carrying his cross. Isaac carried what he would be sacrificed on to the top of the mountain. It was not an easy carry. And this is, most people believe Isaac is probably in his 20s, maybe early 30s. He's definitely not that picture that you get of this 10-year-old boy, 8-year-old boy, 12-year-old boy, whatever it is. He's not this little kid that's going along. He's a man, and he's going along. And so he's carrying this wood on his back to go up. And so he's old enough to be able to do that work, but he's also old enough to understand, hey, Dad, we're missing something. Verse 7 says, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Oh, I don't know if Isaac is catching on. I don't know, because at this time, in this culture, for them, the world around them was worshiping pagan gods who gladly accepted human sacrifice. Like, that was a normal thing then. It's funny, as I was preparing for this and I was thinking about this, like, sacrificing your children in that day was normal for those who were worshiping pagan gods. It's not like today. And I thought, well, then again, it might not be far from today, actually. We might not be that far away from that today as I think about that. And so this sacrifice would not have seemed so far-fetched for them. And so maybe Isaac is beginning to catch on to what is happening here. Maybe. I don't know. And maybe he's just asking an honest question. Verse 8, Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. Simple, short answer. What does Abraham do? He trusts God. God, his response, God's going to take care of it. And we're going to continue doing this. We have prepared to answer God's call, and we're going to follow through, and we're just going to trust him to take care of this. This is, what an incredible picture. As we look through this, I think about, if you have children, what an opportunity. This is a crazy opportunity. What an opportunity for Abraham to display faith in his children. Like Isaac is looking and at Abraham, his father, and he's trusting. And the two of them went on together. It says that is not just that they went side by side, that they went with each other. They went in unity. Like, this is the mission. I don't think Isaac was fully aware of the entire mission at this point, but I think he's maybe catching on. But this is the mission. Isaac was trusting his father Abraham, who was called by God to this, and he was being obedient as well. Abraham instills in him faith. Like, trust God. Isaac, we just got to trust God. He's going to provide. That's all I know. And now I'm moving forward to where he called me, to what he called me to. And I think to myself, how many times do I miss opportunities to instill in my kids that kind of faith and trust? How many times do we miss that? He's leading by example, and Isaac is following that example. Verse 9, when they reached the place where God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Put this all together. Gosh, again, Abraham's 120-ish. He's old. He builds this altar. He places the wood on there. He bounds his son. He ties up his son and he places him on top of his wood. His son's 20-ish. Like, if Isaac decided to rebel, not a problem. Like, not an issue. He could have easily fought back against his father, who's 120 years old. He was a man. He wasn't a boy. He was a man who submitted and surrendered to the will of God, trusting his father and following in obedience. He submitted. He didn't fight back. He didn't argue. He just obeyed. Verse 10, then he, Abraham, reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. As we look at that, I often have these pictures of this story in my head from when I heard it as a young Christian and whatever. And so I have this vision in my head of, Isaac's this little boy, and they're going up this hill, and he's carrying a backpack full of a little bit of wood. And I have this very children's version of this story in my mind. But what's always got me is I get to this part in the story, and then I have this version in my mind where at the last second, at the very last moment, God stops Abraham. And I don't think that's accurate. As I read through and reread through, I don't think that's, maybe he was right here and he was about to do so. I don't know. But I think what's more likely is that Abraham had prepared all this. He laid Isaac down, and then he reached to the side to grab the knife wherever it laid. And as soon as he grabbed it, he hears this, verse 11. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. I like this. Abraham was quick to reply here, but he was also quick to reply at the first, in the beginning of this text. He's quick to reply. He's quick to respond. God, here I am. Where do you want me? And so Abraham, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And so we know from the beginning of this text, this was a test from God. And I'm sometimes challenged by this, but as I look at it, I think there's a point here that God is making. Abraham and Isaac lived in a world where human sacrifice was the norm. And what Abraham's God, Yahweh God, is saying here is, I'm not like those other gods. I'm not like them. I don't want sacrifice. In fact, Hosea 6 tells us that God doesn't desire sacrifice. He desires mercy. He doesn't desire burnt offerings. He desires acknowledgement that he is God. That's what he wants. And I think that is playing out as we look at this here. We see it like he doesn't want sacrifice. He wants us. He wants our hearts. He wants us to follow him. He says, I know that you fear God because you have not withheld your son. At this point, Abraham is willing to give everything. And I think this may be in the process of this, but this may be the first point, the first time it's ever gotten to that point, and he is willing to give everything. He says, you have not withheld from me your son. God knows Abraham's love because of his willingness to sacrifice his son. Let me tell you, we know God's love because of his willingness to sacrifice his son. Verse 13, Abraham looked up, and there he saw Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. And so God provides the ram. God also provided the lamb. Verse 14, so Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. It's what Abraham names this place. And it's interesting to me. We talked about Mount Moriah and the region of Moriah and Jerusalem. And at times later, as the Hebrews would pilgrimage to Jerusalem, they would be traveling this way. And there's a group of psalms that they would sing, songs of ascent, psalms of ascent. One of those, Psalm 121 starts out, verse 1 says, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? Verse 2 says, my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And I think God did this, and for years later, Abraham's descendants, the Hebrew people, would be traveling to Jerusalem, singing these songs, looking at a mountain where God provided a ram in place of Isaac, and where God will provide a lamb in place of all of us. What an incredible picture. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. Verse 15, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I want to stop right there. It's interesting what the angel of the Lord calls out here. And the angel of the Lord, a messenger from God, saying to Abraham, because of what you have and because of what you have not done. He says both of these in this case. And I think for us, that can sometimes be a challenging thing because we think of this idea of Christianity. Oftentimes, people have this view of it's just living by, this set of rules. Don't do this, 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 don't do this. Like here it's clear. It's because of what you have done, you were obedient and you followed me. Right? But you also did not do what I asked you not to do. So what you have not done. And I think a danger that we get into in Christianity, Dallas Willard calls it sin management. We become these Christians who our entire life is just about avoiding sin. Like, don't do this, don't sin. Don't do this, don't do that. And we have this whole list. And what happens is it becomes this work, this effort to avoid sin, to manage sin, to not sin, when God is actually calling us into a relationship to be present with him. To be present with him. It's not about sin management. It's about being present with God. So I just want to encourage you. Like if you're struggling, if you're in a test or a temptation right now, and you're feeling that, and like, I can't do this. I got to avoid that. Just go to God. Go present with Jesus. Stop making all of your efforts to avoid sin and make your efforts to be present with Jesus. Verse 17, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashores. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Not the first time that Abraham has heard this promise. In fact, he's heard this promise multiple times from God. He's just struggled to really believe it, to fully trust, to be all in. In Genesis 15, I think this is a great picture of what it looks like to trust in Jesus, to be saved, to have salvation through our faith in Jesus, but then to walk out sanctification. In Genesis 15, this is years before, God says to Abraham, he appears and he tells Abraham this same promise. And verse 6, Genesis 15:6 says, Abraham believed the Lord, and he, the Lord, credited to him as righteousness. That's faith. That's salvation in a moment, in an instant, in trusting God. He trusted God. He believed, and he received righteousness from God because of his faith. At that point, Abraham had done nothing. No efforts, no works, nothing but faith, but trusting, but believing. And that was credited to him as righteousness. And then we see this process of working that out, working that faith out. Sometimes it doesn't go well. Sometimes he struggles. Sometimes he falls. Falling is not failure if you get back up and keep pursuing God. And he continued to pursue, even to the end, even to what seems like requires the life of his son. He kept pursuing. Faith isn't perfect, but it is persistent. I sit here and I look at this story and I think about the things that Abraham went through, and Isaac is challenged by, and their faith and obedience to continue to follow God, trusting God. And I want you to know that this was a specific test at a specific time. And God was clearly showing Abraham and Isaac and the world, he's not like other gods. He doesn't demand sacrifice. He doesn't desire death. What he wants is us, and he wants to give us life. His desire is mercy and acknowledgement that he is God. It's interesting, Jesus quotes Hosea 6:6 multiple times in different discussions about people in sin. And he points back, but don't you know God desires mercy more than sacrifice? And I think Abraham, as I look at this, I just want to encourage you with this. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what is happening in your life. I don't know your tests, your trials, your temptations. I don't know what you're facing. I don't. I know what I am. And I know that in my life, like, it's hard sometimes. Following Jesus is hard. Trusting God is hard because, man, it seems like the whole world is against us. Satan is definitely against us. The world seems like an easier route to take. And, man, maybe if I just followed that, it would be simpler. But I'm telling you, God has made a promise, and he will provide it. The story of Abraham and Isaac is absolute proof of that. God will provide that for you. Trust him. Lean in. Our life may be messy. I pray that some of yours isn't, but I got a feeling we all are. I know mine is. It's messy. And there are times when we may struggle. Our faith may waver. When Jesus took his disciples before he ascended into heaven, before he commissioned them on the Great Commission, it says that they came to the mountain where he had told them, and they worshiped him, but some of them doubted. Like, they had struggles, they had doubts, and I think their doubt was not in that he was the Messiah. They'd seen him raised from the dead. That was not their doubt. Their doubt was, God, how are you going to do all of this in me? How are you going to make this all work for me? How am I going to be a part of all of this? I think that was their doubts. That was their struggles. And maybe you've got that right now. Like, I question that sometimes. Like, God, how are you using me? How am I going to do this? How is he going to use us? Here's what I know. God is faithful. God is trustworthy. And God will provide all that he promises. And we just have to lean in. We have to trust and encourage and follow that he's good and he loves us. Let's pray.